Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. The chair will receive a message.
Madam Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Madam Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed with an amendment, H.R. 1911, to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 and for other purposes, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Thank you, ma'am.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 2397, including corrections in spelling, punctuation, section and title numbering, cross-referencing, conforming amendments to the table of contents, and short titles, and the insertion of appropriate headings.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the further consideration of H.R. 2397.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, during the final vote series last night, I inadvertently voted no on the Nadler Amendment number 44, and that would prohibit the use of funds to train the Afghan Special Mission Wing. And I would like to state for the record that I support the amendment offered by Mr. Laura, and that had I voted correctly, I would have voted for the amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman's statement will be made a part of the record.
Thank you.
Purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to remove co-sponsors from my bill.
Is the gentleman asking for all co-sponsors to be removed?
No, just 2.
Will the gentleman state which 2?
Yes. Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to remove Congressman Capriano and Congressman Maloney from my bill H.R. 2641, the Responsibly and Professionally Invigorating Development Rapid Act of 2013.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield back. Thank you.
Okay.
How do I raise this thing? The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the President said today that it's time for the House to lay out our ideas to give the middle class a better shot. He said it's time to move past stale debates. Mr. Speaker, the only reason these debates are stale is because the House bills that have been passed to create jobs in America are stalled in the Senate and by the President. This isn't difficult. We need to cut burdensome regulations to stop job creation. The President needs to agree to build the Keystone Pipeline. The President needs to agree to explore for American energy to lower the price of gas and diesel. The President needs to agree to permanently delay all of Obamacare. America deserves an economic recovery. I yield back the time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, let me just commend Congressman Schiff and the 185 members who voted today to restrict the authorization for the use of military force. Today's vote is a very important step in our effort to repeal this overly broad blank check to wage war anywhere, at any time, and for at any length, which, of course, I could not vote for September 14, 2001. I have a bipartisan bill which would repeal the authorization to use military force, and doing so would provide Congress an opportunity, finally, a long overdue opportunity, to have a meaningful debate about our constitutional role in declaring war. Last week, I released a public report from the Congressional Research Service citing 30 instances where this resolution has been invoked. Most Americans, and of course my colleagues in Congress, would be surprised to know that these activities include deploying troops in Ethiopia, Djibouti, Georgia, Yemen, Kenya, the Philippines, Somalia. I could go on and on. It also includes justifying detentions at Guantanamo Bay and warrantless surveillance activities. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert this report into the congressional record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, finally, let me just say it's time to repeal this authorization and rein in the overly broad and deeply troubling NSA domestic spying program. I urge all members to join our continuing efforts and co-sponsor my bill, H.R. 198, to repeal the AUMF.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Permission to address the House and then revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark an anniversary that has pained the Cypriot and Hellenic communities for 39 years. On July 20th, 1974, in blatant violation of international law, Turkey violently invaded Cyprus and captured the northern part of the island. Since the invasion, Turkey has established a heavily armed military occupation that continues to control nearly 40% of Cyprus and has forced 160,000 Greek Cypriots from their homes. Mr. Speaker, it is not impossible to conceive a unified Cyprus that respects the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Cypriots. Cyprus has long been a strong and faithful ally of the United States, and we owe our support for both peace and the end of this illegal occupation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And they're off. That traditional refrain, as horses come out of the gate, ushered in yet another Saratoga season just days ago. This time, a very special season. I recognize Saratoga Racecourse as it celebrates 150 years of thoroughbred racing in Saratoga Springs, New York. On August 3rd of 1863, a son of Irish immigrants, John Morrissey, who served 2 terms in this body, staged the first horse race at what is now known as the Oklahoma Track, giving birth to the oldest continually active sporting venue in the United States. Notable sports writer Red Smith once said of the Saratoga Racecourse, "From New York City, you drive north for about 175 miles, turn left on Union Avenue, and go back 100 years. Racing in Saratoga produces over 2,000 jobs, nearly $15 million in tax revenue, and an economic boost of $200 million to the surrounding region each year. I am honored to recognize 150 years of tradition and community spirit that come to life in a most unique and exciting way that have a special place in our American story. Let me close, Mr. Speaker, the following way, and down the stretch they come. Happy 150th, Saratoga." With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in the memory of Beatriz Arredondo, an inspiring woman
who embodied the spirit of love and compassion. Beatriz, or Nena, as she was called by her loved ones, passed away on June 28, 2013. Beatriz was born on January 16, 1943 in Tamaulipas, Mexico. At a very young age, she knew that she wanted to be a loving wife and mother, and she dreamed of one day seeing her grandchildren. She accomplished these goals magnificently. 54 years ago, she met Ernesto Arredondo Sr., and they were married for 46 years. They have 4 beautiful children: Ernesto Jr., Eduardo, Everardo, and Elizabeth. Beatriz is survived by her husband, her children, and her 10 grandchildren. As is said in St. Paul's second letter to Timothy, she fought the good fight. She finished the race. She kept the faith. She is now in God's arms. Our prayers are with the Arredondo family. With this, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Barletta of Pennsylvania for today and tomorrow, and Mr. Horsford of Nevada for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Just the first part. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrich, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm joined this evening with my colleagues on the House GOP Doctors Caucus and other Republican members to talk about this most important subject, and that's this recent delay of the employer mandate. The Obama administration's announcement that it will delay implementation of the employer mandate due to the enormous regulatory burden on businesses, Mr. Speaker, is proof positive that the Affordable Care Act is a job killer. The administration's excuse for delay was to simplify reporting requirements for small businesses, but employers haven't been against the mandate solely due to its burdensome reporting requirements. While it's estimated that Obamacare will require American job creators, families, and health care providers to spend more than 127 million hours a year on compliance with the law, of far greater concern to business owners is the impact the mandate will have on job creation. The cost of the health insurance and Obamacare's fines will drive up the cost of labor and will continue to be a drag on this economy. This is further evidence that the administration does not get how the law will impact the economy. The U.S. Chamber reported that 72% of small business executives would have a harder time hiring because of Obamacare. The employer mandate has been cited by business owners repeatedly as a major obstacle to expansion. They simply cannot afford it. At a recent small business roundtable, one Georgia business owner said to me, "I want to provide health care insurance for my employees. Obamacare has forced me to choose between that and hiring new people." For instance, one common deterrent to growth that is often cited by small businesses is the 50-employee threshold, where a business must provide insurance to its employees once the 50th full-time employee is hired. This misguided provision has repeatedly forced different hiring practices by these companies. I heard that Heatco, a company which specializes in the design and manufacture of world-class heating solutions and located in my district in Bartow County, Georgia, had looked into expanding. The thing is, they currently have, you guessed it, Mr. Speaker, 49 employees, and to expand by adding an additional employee will cost more than automating some of their processes due to the added Obamacare costs. The administration cannot say with a straight face that businesses were more concerned with reporting requirements rather than the overbearing costs that Obamacare will add to their bottom line. President Obama's announcement doesn't reduce the harmful effects that the mandate will have on employers as we move forward. It could, however, provide cover. Let me repeat that. It could, however, provide cover for Democrats during an election year. This political calculation protects them from voter backlash and from the reality that Obamacare, their law, is to blame for an economy literally hemorrhaging jobs. This is yet another example of the Obama administration replacing the rule of law with partisan raw politics. This unilateral decision is an abuse of executive power and, in my opinion, a clear demonstration President Obama will disregard the very laws he signed for political gain. In 2010, Democrats in Congress determined enforcement of the egregious employer mandate would begin on January 1, 2014. As bad as the law may be, the administration does not have the power to rewrite the law. That responsibility belongs where? Right here in Congress. Just look at your Constitution, which I keep in my pocket, somewhere deep inside my pocket. But I'll guarantee you it's in here because I put it in there every single day. Legalities aside, postponing the mandate for 1 year is not enough. It simply delays the inevitable. When it's eventually enacted, Mr. Speaker, hours will still be cut and pay will still be reduced. Businesses hovering just under the 50-employee threshold will still have to weigh the cost of expansion, and because of the requirement, many will be unable to grow. It is just further proof that the administration does not understand how business works. The lack of response from this administration is also increasingly frustrating. House Republicans have held numerous hearings asking for more information as to how this decision was reached. We have sent letters to the Secretary of the Treasury. We have sent letters to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We have asked witnesses to gain a better insight of this ruling, but have continuously been rebuffed. In other words, no response to our request. It's offensive to the American people that the administration cannot offer clear guidance on a central piece of their Obamacare fiasco. Mr. Speaker, this delay will also affect verification of individuals in this insurance exchange. It's amazing that the administration is suggesting that we will rely on the honor system to determine federal payments. This is truly outrageous. According to the law, you aren't eligible for Obamacare subsidies if your employer has offered you what the government considers affordable coverage, spelled out clearly in the law. Well, with the delay of the employer mandate, however, the government won't be able to verify whether the individual has been offered coverage. And this will open the door wide open for enormous fraud and abuse, and the cost will skyrocket. We've seen the same thing in other entitlement programs that rely on this so-called honor system. It's clear that what we are seeing is a tactic of subsidize first, ask questions later. Remember the old phrase, pay and chase, on Medicare claims? It is the administration's goal to enroll as many people in Obamacare in these exchanges as they can and as soon as they can, i.e. this year of delay, so that we will never be able to repeal this bill. The federal takeover of 1/6 of the economy, Mr. Speaker, raises taxes on small business owners and middle-class families. It guts Medicare seniors, it guts Medicare, and will irreparably harm the doctor-patient relationship. Instead, we need state-based reforms that will lower costs, give patients more control of their own health insurance policies, increase access, and ensure a higher standard of care. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to yield to my colleagues, the gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris, anesthesiologist by profession before Congress, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, and I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding. And the doctor's absolutely right. That employer mandate will increase the cost for employers, which means we're going to get less job creation and less job growth in an economy that can't do with any less job creation. In fact, as the doctor probably knows, since January, virtually all the jobs created in this country because of this mandate have been part-time jobs. We're rapidly converting to a part-time economy. That's not what Americans expect. That's not what Americans deserve. And that problem won't be solved until that mandate goes away. Not just delayed, but goes away. But the doctor talked about the costs per employee when the employee pays. What the doctor hadn't mentioned is the cost if you go on the individual market, because that's the other market created under the President's Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. And you've heard much in the past week, because the President has gone around, Mr. Speaker, pointing to New York and saying, you see, premiums are going to go down 50%, the wonders of Obamacare. Well, Mr. Speaker, the truth is the President can only talk about New York because in virtually every other state there will be huge increases. And, Mr. Speaker, we have to examine why the decrease in New York is 50%. It's because they start with such a high premium that even at half the cost, they're still multiples of the premium in other states. So, for instance, let's take a look at what the average premium in New York right now is for a healthy 30-year-old non-smoker buying a policy. Because, Mr. Speaker, the President and the Secretary of HHS and everyone who has schemed this plan has said, unless you get healthy young people to buy insurance, the whole plan falls apart. So let's look at what it will cost that 30-year-old non-smoking male, the people who are among the highest of the uninsured, the highest in number, what it'll cost them. Well, in New York right now, it costs, now, Mr. Speaker, this is the average plan. The median priced plan in New York is $5,750 a year, or about $500 a month right now. Now, that median priced plan in the President's home state of Illinois is $1,450, or about $1,300 a month, about one-fourth the price of the New York policies, because, Mr. Speaker, New York has Obamacare-type regulations in place. That's why their costs are so high right now. In fact, Obamacare is not quite as regulated as the New York market, so the prices can come down a little bit. But, you know, if it comes down from $500 to $250, it's still twice the cost of that policy in Illinois right now. Or maybe we should look at the Vice President's state of Delaware, where the average 30-year-old male's policy price is about $1,380, or let's round up to $1,200 a month. That's about one-fourth the price of the current policy in New York, and even with those tremendous Obamacare savings, will be half the price of the policy in New York, the Obamacare policy. Now, in my state of Maryland, let's look at what some other states other than New York, what's happened. I'll talk about my home state of Maryland, the largest nonprofit insurer. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I said the nonprofit insurer, because you can't blame profit as the reason for a high cost. The largest nonprofit insurer said that the average price increase is 25%, and for a young, healthy person, exactly the ones that have to be signed up for the Obamacare scheme to work, is as high as 150% increase. 150%. Mr. Speaker, we can't get healthy young people to buy insurance now. How in the world are we going to convince them to buy insurance in Maryland when it costs almost twice as much? We can run all the taxpayer-financed ads, because that's what it's going to be, all the people watching who have a television will see what happens this fall as we spend millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to try to convince healthy young people to buy a plan that's way too overpriced. But let's look at California. Let's say, well, maybe the big states are different. Maybe if New York's expensive, maybe California is different. Well, Mr. Speaker, in California, the average cost of that plan for the healthy young person is $2,200, or about $200 a month. Why, it's less than half of the cost in New York, and sure enough, in figures released last month in California, the cost of the Obamacare individual plans will increase by 64 to 146%. 64 to 146%. So that $200 a month premium is now going to be $400 a month. Well, Mr. Speaker, young people who are entering the job market are entering at low levels, relatively low levels of pay. Where in the world are they going to find $400 to pay for an overpriced plan that they've seen advertised on their local NBA game? Of course, the ad's paid for with taxpayer dollars. Mr. Speaker, this is why this house of cards will collapse. We are in for a rough time this fall. America and people in America who depend on their health care insurance are in for a really rough time. The costs are going to go up. The confusion will be immense. And, Mr. Speaker, Americans deserve better. So that's why we have called on the President, forget a one-year delay of the mandate on employers only. We need a permanent delay on the entire plan, and the time for it is now. The President today made a big deal in his pivot to jobs. Mr. President, I would suggest stop the $100 million trips to Africa and go talk to some of our small business employers and ask them what's their concern. How will they create jobs? And they will tell you, this is what they would tell the President, Mr. Speaker. They would tell the President, get rid of that Obamacare. That's a weight hanging over my business's head that I can't afford, I can't predict, and is stopping me from hiring people. And the people I have now, it's making me shift them to part-time jobs. So I'll come full circle, Mr. Speaker. If what we want is a part-time economy, let's barrel ahead with Obamacare. America deserves much better than part-time jobs. Much, much better. We deserve to create full-time, good-paying jobs by the small and large businesses in this country that are just waiting to show economic growth. We have got to remove this lead weight from around their neck. So I thank the gentleman, the doctor from Georgia, for yielding the time, and I will yield back.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Before I yield time to the gentleman from Kentucky, colleagues, I want you to look at this first poster, because a lot of what the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Speaker, was talking about in regard to costs shows it pretty simply here. And the change in the cost per employee because of the health care law, if you have 49 employees, as we talked about, there is no increase in the cost of health care because you don't have to provide the government mandated expensive coverage, so there is no increase. That's why, of course, they keep the employee rate at 49 and don't hire those extra employees. If you are at 50, though, and you are under the mandate, the increase is $800 per employee. If you are at 75 employees, the increase is $1,200 per employee. 100 employees, $1,400 increase, and 150, $1,600 per year increase per employee. That's why so many of these small businesses are right there, my colleagues, at 49 with no increase because no job growth, or employees that are hired at 29 hours a week. Try to support yourself much less a family, on 29 hours a week. I now yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
I thank my friend from Georgia for yielding, and I appreciate him letting me be part of the Doctors Caucus for tonight. I don't want to pretend that I am a doctor. I'm certainly not, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mr. Speaker, to talk about the health care bill. And it's nice that this has been organized, and so we can be here tonight to talk about a topic that is critical to the American people, and that's the crushing mandates in Obamacare. As we know, last week, Mr. Speaker, the House considered two bills to relieve the American people of these mandates. The Authority for a Mandate Delay Act would give large employers a reprieve from compliance with Obamacare's employer mandate until 2015. And the Fairness for American Families Act would grant individuals until 2015 to comply with the law's individual mandate. This one-size-fits-all health care law is a train wreck. It's been quoted as a train wreck by members of the other party who voted for it, or the other body. The administration has clearly realized this employer mandate will hinder businesses and their ability to grow, and just a few weeks ago announced their decision to delay the implementation of this bill. And I appreciate being here tonight because I come from a small business manufacturing background that provides health care at low cost to our employees. And I believe I understand the complexities that an employer faces when providing health insurance for their workers. This law encourages employers to cut workers' hours, pare back their number of workers, and move workers from existing health insurance plans onto the exchange. Well, I'm glad to see the administration is finally paying attention to the disastrous consequences of this law. It is disappointing that they expect families and small business owners to comply with the crushing mandates while they give big businesses a break. Improving access to health care and making it more affordable should be the goal and the outcome. I will continue to fight for full repeal of this law, but in the interim, I'm glad the House moved last week to delay the implementation of the crushing mandates. I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to the gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Kentucky, and although he is not a member of the House GOP Doctors Caucus, I think that we might take a vote here on the House floor. The co-chair of the House GOP Doctors Caucus is here with me, and I'm going to recognize him in just a second. And so he and I are co-chairs, so Mr. Guthrie, we may indeed make you an honorary member. Thank you very much. We appreciate your input. But clearly, Mr. Speaker, the issue, it's not just about doctor-patient relationship, but the reason we're giving this presentation tonight, and the leadership has asked us to talk about this issue, the members of the House GOP Doctors Caucus, and it includes medical doctors, I think about 16 of us. It includes dentists. It includes a clinical psychologist. It includes a hospital administrator, formally, before becoming members of Congress, advanced practice nurses, Bachelor of Science nurses, people in the health care space that know of what they speak. And in that regard, I can't think of anybody, Mr. Speaker, who knows this issue better than my co-chairman of the House GOP Doctors Caucus and fellow OBGYN physician, Dr. Phil Rowe from Tennessee.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Speaker, and to talk about what Dr. Harris just a minute ago. I want to do that before I actually explain how we got where we are to our viewers. What Dr. Harris didn't say, in the small group market in New York, that in 1992 there were 1.2 million people who got their insurance through the small group market. And at that point in time, the governor, Cuomo at that time, initiated no pre-existing conditions in the small group market, community rating. And community rating, for those that don't know what that means, is it means that your sickest patient or your sickest customer can't be charged more than 3 times what a well person is. So they're not actually paying the actual cost of their care. Someone else is paying that cost. So that's community rating. And guaranteed issue means you can't be turned down. Exactly what we're doing here. So what happened to that market? Within 10 years, that market had all but evaporated in New York. There were 120,000. It dropped by 90%. Today, in a state with almost 20 million people, there are 31,000 people. That's 0.0016 or so % of the people who are in that state get their insurance through that market. And what is it? Not only did they basically ruin that market, it's now one of the most expensive in the United States. And the only way it's going to come down is for those premiums to be subsidized by young, healthy people. As Dr. Harris said, young people like my 3 children who just got out of college, starting their families, and cannot afford something that basically they're not paying for. So I wanted to point that out. I thought it was very important to understand how we got there and why we think this won't happen again. Now let's go back, Dr. Gingrey, Mr. Speaker, to how we got here. Basically, the health care debate started because health care needed reforming in this country. And the reason it needed reforming is we had costs going up more than inflation. No question that was occurring. And we had a group of our people in this country who work every day who were uninsured. So we needed to do that. We had people with pre-existing conditions that couldn't get health insurance. You and I saw them. Maybe a woman who had developed breast cancer and dropped out of the job market. On the way back in, couldn't find it. So there's no argument from us that we needed to have health care reform. So what did we have? We had a doctor's caucus at that time that had 9 physicians, and not one of us was asked one thing about this health care bill. I brought 31 years' experience to the House floor, an experience with health care reform in Tennessee when we tried to reform our Medicaid program called TennCare. So how is this supposed to work? And well, the idea was we're going to expand coverage to people who can't and make it more affordable. What was the President's promise, Mr. Speaker? The promise was if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health insurance coverage, you can keep your health insurance coverage. And we're going to make the cost go down. What is the reality? People are losing their doctors for a variety of reasons. The cost has gone up dramatically, as Dr. Harris pointed out. And let me also point out about what sectors involved who in health insurance. It is complicated. In ERISA-approved plans, if you have you work for a company that provides health insurance coverage, that covers about 60% of the people in this country. About 160 million people work under that. Let's say in my practice, we have 400-plus employees that, in my medical practice, that get their health insurance through their job. So that covers about 60% of the people in this country. And sadly, in the last 4 or 5 years, because of the change in the percent of people who are employed in the workforce, that number has actually gone down 2% to 58%, instead of going up as it usually does in most recoveries. Number 2, Medicare, and number 3, Medicaid. So all of this entire debate about and remember, pre-existing conditions are not an issue in that group of people, and we're looking at over 80%. So this 2,700-page bill really had to do with less than 20% of the population. I think we could have done something much simpler, much less expensive, and certainly much easier to explain. And we're going to spend an hour here tonight, Mr. Speaker, and trying to break this down where the average person can understand it, understand how it affects me and my family. And I'm going to hopefully share some of those things with you. I chair the Subcommittee of Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions in the Education and the Workforce Committee. And I've held 3 hearings around the country. I held one in Evansville, Indiana, one in Butler, Pennsylvania, and recently in Concord, North Carolina. And what happened, we had businesses come in there. Remember that the market that wasn't functioning was a small group market and the individual market. And let me explain how the individual market works. When I left my practice 5 years ago to run for Congress, after 31 years of practice, I left the practice. I had group insurance covered under ERISA, that 160 million people in my family. I left that, and I then am on the individual market. Well, because I'm treated differently tax-wise, in the day before, I had a tax-deductible health plan. The next day, I could buy that plan, but guess what? It was much more expensive because it was not tax-deductible. And that's how individuals find themselves. So those are the people we were trying to help. What's happened to them? Well, I'll give you an example. In our state of Tennessee, Dr. Harry spoke about several states. I spoke to our state insurance commissioner just recently, and in the individual market, someone out there who's a young person going out to get insurance, they've just finished college or whatever, and we'll talk about the under 26s in a little bit, about what the bill actually did. Those rates are going up between 45 and 70% in my state. In the small group market, that's where small businesses go out and select their insurance, 50 to 55%. Now, does that sound like rates are going down? And this story is all over the country, state after state after state you see this in. I wanted this plan to work because, as I said, we did need health care reform, but we needed patient-centered, market-driven health care reform that would help hold those costs down and put the decision-making not in bureaucrats' hands, not in insurance companies' hands, but in doctors and patients and families' hands. That's who it needs to be in. So I think the Obamacare plan started this way. How do we fund this plan? Well, they funded it. They knew it was going to be expensive because of all the tax subsidies that are going to go. So where did the money come from? Well, the money came from about a $700 billion grab from Medicare, a plan that's already underfunded, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan now in Medicare where for every dollar placed in that plan, and I'm on Medicare as Dr. Gingrey is, every dollar we spend, the recipient gets $3 out. We know that's not sustainable. We have as many as 10,000 people a day entering Medicare age, which means that every year we're going to have 3 million people who turn 65 years of age as the baby boomers hit. We have an already underfunded Medicare plan, adding in the next 10 years 30 to 36 million people onto a plan that we're taking $700 billion out of. And how do we control that cost, Mr. Speaker? We pass a part of that bill called the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Wow. What is that? Well, I think that's one of the most egregious parts of this entire health care plan, and it's an interesting little thing. You have 15 unelected bureaucrats proposed by the President, approved by the Senate, paid $164,000 or $5,000 a year to a 6-year term, accountable to no one. Accountable to no one. The courts can't do anything about it. We have to have 60 votes in the Senate to overturn what they do or agree with what they do, and you couldn't get the Senate 60 people to agree the sun was coming up in the east tomorrow. So don't worry about them worrying about your health care. What can they do? Well, basically what they can do, they start out, and this board is now supposed to be appointed this year, and they have a budget which we've tried to cut the funding for because, as I said, I think it's the most egregious part of this plan. What can they do? Well, they can withhold and cut providers. And when you cut providers enough, and that's doctors and hospitals and medical providers, they'll refuse to see those patients. And I've had it pointed out 1,000 times. Oh, it says in the bill you cannot ration care. Well, there was a very good article, and I still read my medical journals, in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious journals in this country, that reviewed the Independent Payment Advisory Board and looked back over the past 25 years. Mr. Speaker, 21, and this analysis of the Independent Payment Advisory Board wasn't for it or against it, it was just analyzing the effects of it. And a look back over the past 25 years, 21 of those 25 years, cuts would have occurred. And we all know, Dr. Gingrey and I know, and Mr. Speaker, we know that our colleagues out there have been prevented by cuts by the action of this body right here in the sustainable growth rate in Medicare. So it means...
I'm going to reclaim my time just for a second and then yield back to the gentleman because, Mr. Speaker, he's bringing up a subject that's so important that our colleagues understand on both sides of the aisle. This IPAB, Independent Payment Advisory Board, that Dr. Rowe is talking about, 15 bureaucrats, well, none of them have been appointed yet. Not one, nada. And the law says that if the Secretary doesn't appoint or these 15 are not appointed, and yes, they are going to make about $175,000 a year, then it's just she right now, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or whomever in the future, they don't have to have that board. one individual bureaucrat can make these cuts. This really rationing cuts is what it is. And I'll yield back to my colleague.
I thank the gentleman for pointing that out. One single person, and that may not be Secretary Sebelius, it'll be another name, but it will put the power in one person and take the power away from this body right here, which is why we have a bipartisan bill to overturn this and reclaim the power that the people gave us, which is we are accountable to the people. And right now, when you make those cuts, we would not have any way, almost no way, to fix that. I think that's a great point, and I appreciate Mr. Speaker, Dr. Gingrey, pointing that out. So we have that board, the money grab from Medicare. Number two, 21 new taxes to pay for this bill, one of them a medical device tax. And let me assure you, as a physician, I've been the recipient, as have my patients have been, from all the incredible improvements in laparoscopic surgery. I watched it start from its infancy, learned my first laparoscopic procedure when I was a captain at Fort Eustis, Virginia in 1974 in the military. After having returned from Korea, I learned how to use a laparoscope. And I watched all this wonderful new equipment occur to where we're doing absolutely marvelous things, minimally invasive to patients, and it's improved patient care dramatically. There will be taxes on that new innovation. And what I'm fearful of, in my state, the single biggest export we have are medical devices, that this will be pushed offshore, and the thing that we've been the shining star in the world is medical innovation. There's no question about it, and we do not want to lose that. So we've got 21 new taxes, and there are taxes on health care plans, taxes, the mandates are taxes. So we have the taxes. Obamacare works because of a three-legged stool, Mr. Speaker, and this is how it works. It works because of Medicaid expansion. That's over half of the new people there, a plan that already is under siege in most states in the Union. Number two, the individual mandate, that's what I'm getting around to, the mandates that occur because we have to have young, healthy people subsidizing others to make the individual market work. And number three, the mandate on business. And last week when the Treasury, in a blog from the Treasury, not an announcement from the White House, just a blog came out and said that, hey, we're not going to have the business mandate for a year. And I applaud the President for that. I think this is not something I disagree with. The disagreement is it's the law of the land. I don't see how you can unilaterally decide I'm going to enforce this part of the law because I can't make it work right now, or the individual mandate. And we voted last week, as the Speaker knows, and I believe the Speaker supported both of the bills that Mr. Guthrie talked about. I'll now yield back to my friend.
And I thank the gentleman. Reclaiming just for a second, Sunday, I guess it was, on the Sunday morning Meet the Press, and that's what this next poster shows. Yesterday on NBC's Meet the Press, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, the Democrat Majority Leader from Nevada, proclaimed that, and this is a quote, "Obamacare has been wonderful for America," end quote. Well, let's just take a look at some of the headlines from this past week that highlight just how wonderful it has been. Investors Business Daily says, Obamacare mandate delay. Employers keep job cuts. For many workers, the one-year delay in Obamacare's employer mandate was too little, too late. Reuters says, analysis, Obamacare struggles to meet make-or-break deadline. And this is a quote from Reuters. With time running out, United States officials are struggling to cope with the task of launching the new online health insurance exchanges at the heart of President Barack Obama's signature health reforms by an October 1st deadline. Time magazine, Obamacare delay increases costs and complications. The Obama administration's recent announcement that the Affordable Care Act's employer mandate will kick in a year late could ripple beyond the brief extension, increasing costs and complicating implementation of other vital parts of the law. Think the exchanges as an example. And then CNN Money says this, Delaying the Obamacare employer mandate has simply put off rules businesses already had started to adjust to. I mean, that's the reality here, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague from Tennessee knows it. I think my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle know it. And that's why in my opening remarks, Mr. Speaker, I mentioned that, hey, you know, is it really the employers, the small businessmen and women that were knocking on the White House door saying, oh, you know, we can't meet these reporting requirements, please help us do something? Or was it some of my Democratic friends, whether in this chamber or the other body, saying, you know, 2014 is going to be a kind of a tough year for us, having to defend this train wreck? I think that's what the senator from Montana said. Of course, he's going to retire rather than face the music. Can't say that I blame him. But that's what's going on here. And people, you know, people are not dumb. I think they can read between the lines. And so we'll continue. And I hope my colleague can stay a while longer. If not, I'd like to yield back to him at this point.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to, you always hear, Mr. Speaker, that Republicans have no ideas for health care. Well, we had plenty of ideas, they just weren't heard. We had 80 amendments to this bill, none. I want the people to hear this, to show you how frustrating this process has been now that we're looking at this almost incomprehensible bill. Is that we had 80 amendments to the Affordable Care Act taken to the Rules Committee. I think I had 10. Not one amendment was ruled in order. Not one. Dr. Harris was here a moment ago and talked about the price of an individual insurance policy in the state of New York, and then he talked about the price of an insurance policy in Delaware and Illinois. Think about if a person in New York, an employer, a person in a small business, an individual there, hey, I'd like to buy my plan in Illinois. If I could buy it across state lines, I could save myself a lot of money. And I can guarantee you that the price in New York State would come down, or people would buy those plans somewhere else. That's why empowering the free market system will help and work in health care. Let me go to the real world, Mr. Speaker and Dr. Gingrey. Let me go to Concord, North Carolina 2 months ago, and I held a field hearing there. And I want to introduce you to a business owner there, Mr. Horn, who has a textile manufacturing business, and he has 350 employees. And if you're in the textile business, you're a pretty doggone good businessman if you're in business today, as difficult as that is. He provided 80% of all the health care costs for his employees. They covered 20. He covers all preventive services, everything. If you need a colonoscopy, if you need a mammogram, he covers all of that. In addition to that, he has a health nurse on his business there to help if you have issues there. So he has a prevention and wellness program. He's done everything right. So what exactly does he get for this? What he gets for this, when the fiscal cliff bill was passed, is because of the way his company is set up, he got an increase in his personal tax rate. He got that. Number two, he got a $63 per employee, not per policy, but per employee, or per person, I should say, which will cost him tens of thousands of dollars. And guess what that money goes to do? It goes to indemnify insurance companies so that they'll be induced to provide this insurance on the exchange and they won't lose money. Mr. Horn gets absolutely nothing. So what will he have to do? He'll either have to cut his salaries, he'll have to cut the benefits, or he won't hire someone, or he won't be able to make needed investments. Let's go to my hometown of Johnson City, Tennessee, where I was mayor before I came here. My political job there was being mayor of our local community. I just talked to our city manager not long ago, and we're going to get a bill in our community of 60,000 people $177,000, of which we get absolutely nothing because it's on the self-insured market. And anybody who's self-insured, in a lot of major businesses, I talked to one who's going to get a $25 million, and I won't mention who it is. It's a major company. Everyone in this room will know who it is. They write a $25 million check. That could be to hire new employees. It could be to buy new plant and equipment. It could be to grow their business. It's a globally competitive company that has to compete around the world. Let me introduce another person here, Sonny's Barbecue. And when we have, that's a North Carolina, famous restaurants in the Charlotte area. And if we had the field hearing over there, and we sampled Sonny's Barbecue the night before we had the field hearing. It was great. And what that company is doing is that they found out that 70%, since the recession, 70% of people changed their eating out habits by reducing or even eliminating dining out and increasing menu prices, which is what they'll tell you to do, just up your price. Well, people quit coming. And when people quit coming to your restaurant, you go out of business. And what they're finding out is that they have had to cut, as Mr. Speaker, as Dr. Gingrich clearly pointed out, they're looking at cutting their employees' hours to 29 or under, so that many full-time employees will now be part-time employees, so they'll go under that threshold of 49. The community college, where we held the hearing, made a very eloquent statement that they were going to have to not allow adjunct faculty. And what most community colleges do, about 60% or 65% of their faculty are full-time. But the others are people in the community. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, maybe like Dr. Gingrich, who would teach a health class or a class on whatever issue would be in his specialty. Well, now, because of what the IRS has said, you can only teach 3 classes or you hit the 29-hour threshold. Well, how does that happen? Well, for every hour you're in the classroom, they count 2 hours outside the classroom. That's called I think that's called the Cambridge hour. And so you can only teach 3 classes. It will mean in their community college that they won't be able to offer certain classes on time. It'll delay students getting out. The state of Virginia has 7,000 part-time workers that they're going to be sure that stay under that 29-hour, and they make it a little more individual. Someone that I know in my district works for a chain restaurant, Mr. Speaker, a divorced woman who works full-time. She relies on tips, relies on her 40 hours a week. She has a health insurance policy. She's going to lose her health insurance policy, and they're going to cut her hours to 29, which means that for every month she loses an entire week of wages. So she now has got to go find a second job to pay her bills, Mr. Speaker. And I can go on with examples like this that I've heard in my own testimony. And just yesterday we had testimony on the mandate. Certainly the businesses appreciate the year of reprieve. What we voted here on the House floor in a bipartisan manner, Mr. Speaker, I might add, that we voted to also take individuals. My goodness, here's a person out here who just graduated from college and has got their first job, and we're requiring them now, taxing them if they don't buy this insurance. And let me point out how quickly the young people will figure this out. I did something rather unique, as Dr. Gingrich did, and I heard here on the House floor we should pass the bill and then read it and find out what's in it. Well, guess what? I did just the opposite. I read the bill and found out some things, and I went back and checked to be sure I was correct on this. But here's what happens if you don't pay the penalty. Let's say you're a young individual out there and you say, look, I just can't afford $400 or $300 a month out of my paycheck. I've got student loans and other things to pay for. I'm trying to get into my first apartment. The penalty is this. It's $95 for the first year. Okay, so what can the IRS do to collect that money? They can't garnish your wages. They can't do that. There is no civil or criminal penalty, so there's nothing they have to come after you. The only thing they can do is if you have overpaid your taxes, or if you have a refundable credit coming in, like an earned income tax credit, child tax credit, they can withhold your refund. That's the only recourse they have. Young people were figured out, and why will they figure it out and not buy it, and why is this going to collapse? it's going to collapse because these young people are going to pay the $95, not the $300 a month or $200 a month that they're going to pay. They'll pay the one-time penalty if the IRS can ever figure out how to collect it. That's what they're going to do. And if you don't have all these young people, remember, healthy people paying in, it doesn't work. I yield to my colleague.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding back to me. I've got one last poster that I wanted to point out, Mr. Speaker, to my colleagues. It's a little complicated. I'll try to make it as simple as I can. But basically, let's start right here with the employer. And under that, in this diagram, fewer than 50 full-time employees, including full-time equivalents, then no employer penalty for not offering a health insurance benefit. But in the most egregious situation, the employer has 50 or more full-time employees, including full-time equivalents, and the employer decides not to offer coverage. If a tax credit is obtained by at least one of those full-time employees in an exchange, then the annual penalty to that employer is $2,000 for the year, not just for that one, but for every single employee that he or she employs. It could be hundreds, it could be thousands.
Above 30.
Yeah, they get a break for 30, yeah.